Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a late Cretaceous predator, Arcovenator escote.
That's right. And we're drawing directly from the scientific papers that described it, its discovery, classification, its whole world, really.
Our mission then is to figure out what makes Arcovenator special. What does it tell us about life back then?
And it has a great hook. It was found, believe it or not, during motorway construction in France. A bit of modern life uncovering ancient history.
Amazing. So we're setting our sights on southeastern France, roughly 72 to 76 million years ago, late Cretaceous. Let's jump right in. The name, Arcovenator, what's the story there?
Sure. Arcovenator basically means ark hunter. Arc refers to the Arc River Basin where it was found, and venator is Latin for hunter.
Ark hunter. Okay.
And the species name, Escote, that's a nod to Escoda, the motorway company, their construction project actually led to the fossils being discovered.
Huh. So the name itself bridges the ancient and modern discovery. Love it. Okay. Place it for us on the big dinosaur family tree. The scientific rundown.
Okay, big picture first. Domain Eukaryota, Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata, getting closer, clade Dinosauria, clade Saurischia, then clade Theropoda, the meat-eaters,
Right.
then family Abelisauridae, subfamily Majungasaurinae, and finally, genus Arcovenator, species Arcovenator escote. That's the classification laid out by Tortosa and colleagues in 2014.
Abelisaurid. We've talked about them before. A distinctive group. Who were Arcovenator's closest relatives within that?
Within the bigger umbrella of Abelisauridae, its closest kin are the Noasauridae. And if you zoom out a bit more, you get to relatives like Lumosaurus and the famous Ceratosaurus, all part of the larger Ceratosauria group.
Okay, so nested layers of relationships. And what are those key features, the things that scream Abelisaurid when you find them, like for Arcovenator?
Yeah, they had a very particular look. Think short, tall skulls, not long and low like many theropods. And the bone surface, especially on the skull, often had this rough, sculpted, almost bumpy texture. Really characteristic. Plus, the forelimbs, well, they were drastically reduced. Tiny little arms, sometimes just nubs.
Wow.
But contrast that with really stout, powerful hind limbs. These were clearly animals relying on their bite and their leg strength.
Very different silhouette from a T-Rex then. Okay, let's zoom in on Arcovenator itself. This arc hunter, what did it look like? Size, unique features.
Well, initial thoughts put it at maybe 5 to 6 meters long, so decent size.
Yeah, not small.
But later studies refined that estimate down a bit to about 4.8 meters, which is still roughly 16 feet. Pretty substantial predator.
16 feet. Okay. And you mentioned a brain case was found.
Yes, a nearly complete brain case, which is fantastic. And interestingly, it's about the same size as the brain cases of Majungasaurus and Carnotaurus.
Other big Abelisaurids.
Exactly. Suggests maybe a similar brain size, even if the overall body sizes might have varied a bit between them.
Interesting. What about the skull itself? Any standout features that really define Arcovenator?
Oh yeah. The skull roof, the very top of the head, is quite special. Right in the middle, there's this small opening, a midline foramen.
A hole.
Sort of, yeah. It sits on a slight dome made by the frontal bones. It might have been related to the pineal gland, you know, the thing involved in regulating cycles.
Like a little skylight for its brain.
Huh, maybe. And the frontal bones themselves, their thickness is kind of intermediate. Thicker than in some relatives like Rugops, but not as massively thick as in, say, Rajasaurus.
Sort of just right thickness. What else was going on with that skull?
Well, just above the eye socket, there was this shallow depression, a fossa, with another small opening, a fenestra, inside it. It's bordered by a few different skull bones, the lacrimal, frontal, and postorbital.
Okay.
And then the parietal bones, which form the back part of the skull roof, they had these ridges on the inside edges that fused together towards the back to form a sagittal crest. A bit like a low bony ridge down the midline.
Got it. You mentioned the postorbital bone, the one near the eye.
Yes, and Arcovenator's postorbital is really diagnostic. Its shape is sort of transitional.
How so?
It's kind of halfway between the simpler T-shape seen in earlier Abelisaurs, like Abelisaurus, and the more derived inverted L shape you see in Carnotaurus. It has this extra sheet of bone connecting parts of it.
Ah, okay.
And on top of that, it had this thick, rough projection right over the eye socket, forming a solid bony brow, plus another rough patch, a tuberosity on a lower part of the bone. These unique bits are what scientists call autapomorphies, defining features just for Arcovenator.
So a very unique configuration around the eye. What about further back on the skull?
Also interesting, the paracipedal processes, those wing-like bits sticking out sideways at the very back of the skull,
Oh,
they had these extra little bony bars, one above and one below.
really? What did they do?
They seem to frame little depressions right next to the foramen magnum, the big hole where the spinal cord connects. It's quite unusual. The ear region generally was pretty similar to a Jungosaurus, another close relative.
But some differences.
Minor ones, yeah. Things like the angle of one process, the length of another ridge called the crista produca, the size of a groove near some nerve openings. Subtle stuff, but it's distinguish it.
And overall, was the skull heavily ornamented like Carnotaurus with its horns, or Majungasaurus?
Actually, no. Compared to Majungasaurus, the external bone texture on Arcovenator's skull seems to have been generally smoother, more subdued.
Okay, less bumpy. But the teeth were impressive, I assume.
Definitely. They were tall and blade-like, about 3 to 5.5 centimeters long, and they had serrations like a steak knife.
Uh-huh.
These little denticles were on the front edge, but only near the tip, and then all the way down the back edge. Though the density of serrations varied a bit. Good for slicing.
Sounds nasty.
Mm.
Okay, moving away from the skull, what about the rest of the skeleton? What did the vertebrae and limb bones tell us?
Well, they found some tail vertebrae, caudals, and they were remarkably similar to those of Majungasaurus. Yeah, but a bit more compressed, sort of flatter top to bottom. The main body of the vertebrae had surfaces that were kind of intermediate in shape compared to other Abelisaurids, and they lacked some features like internal air pockets or extra joints found in some groups.
Yeah.
And the transverse processes, the sticky out bits on the sides, weren't angled as steeply upwards as they are in some South American Abelisaurids, the Brachyrostra.
And the legs. You said Abelisaurids had stout hind limbs.
Exactly. The tibia, the main lower leg bone, was robust. About 51 centimeters long in the specimen found, it had a really well-developed nemial crest.
That's the ridge at the top front, right, like on our shin.
Precisely, yeah. Very prominent. It also had a noticeable bump on the upper outer side, a slight curve where the fibula attaches, a distinct ridge running down the lower part, and tapered ends where it met the ankle.
And the fibula, the other lower leg bone.
Also found. Nearly half a meter long. And it showed the typical features you'd expect for a ceratosaur that broader group Arcovenator belongs to.
So, a mosaic of features, really.
Yeah.
Some broadly ceratosaurian, some linking it closely to Majungasaurus and other Majungasaurians. This brings us nicely to its evolutionary position. Where did the analysis place Arcovenator within the Abelisaur family?
The big study by Tortosa and his team put it firmly inside the Majungasaurinae subfamily.
Right.
That group includes Majungasaurus from Madagascar, plus Indosaurus and Rajasaurus from India. So an interesting geographic spread there, and their results lined up pretty well with earlier ideas about these relationships.
Right. And what specific features tie this Majungasaurinae group together? What makes them a distinct branch?
They share some key skull characteristics. For one, an elongated antorbital fenestra, that's the big opening in the snout in front of the eye. And also the parietal bone, back of the skull roof again, has that sagittal crest we mentioned, but it widens towards the front, becoming almost triangular.
Interesting shit.
Yeah. And their analysis also supported the idea that some other fragmentary fossils from France were also Abelisaurids. One interesting side note, their analysis actually suggested Abelisaurus itself might be a Carnotauran, part of the other main Abelisaurid branch. That's still debated, though.
Fascinating how these bone details build the family tree. Okay, let's zoom out again. Paleobiogeography. Where Arcovenator lived and what its presence there means for the big picture of dinosaur distribution.
This is where it gets really interesting. Finding Abelisauroids like Arcovenator in Europe, this European archipelago of islands during the Late Cretaceous, it really complicates the simpler story.
Similar stories like
just assuming their distribution is purely down to the continents drifting apart from the old supercontinent Gondwana, it suggests more was going on.
Okay, so not just passive drifting. What else?
Well, the evidence seems to point to two different waves or lineages of Abelisaurids in Europe. There's an older, more primitive group, including things like Dinosaurus and Tarascosaurus.
Right.
And then there's this later, more derived group that includes Arcovenator. And this group is much more closely related to the Majungasaurines from Madagascar and India.
Madagascar and India. That's a long way from France.
Yeah.
How did that connection happen?
Good question. The fact that the two European groups aren't each other's closest relatives is key. It suggests the older group might have been kind of stranded in Europe by continental movements. That's vicariance.
Okay, isolated.
But the close link between Arcovenator and the Madagascar-India forms suggests maybe some kind of dispersal happened later on, maybe hopping between islands or crossing narrower sea channels than we might think.
So dinosaurs potentially crossing water barriers.
Hmm.
It challenges the typical image.
It seems plausible based on the fossil patterns. And these findings also bolster the idea that Africa might have been a crucial crossroads.
A hub.
Yeah, potentially a hub or a series of stepping stones allowing animal movement between Europe and the India-Madagascar landmass. Meanwhile, the South American Abelisaurids seem to have been doing their own thing, more isolated during this period.
It's incredible how one fossil discovery can reshape our understanding of ancient world connections. Okay, let's ground ourselves back in France. The discovery itself. Tell us more about how and where Arcovenator was found.
So the actual site is near the town of Pouillers in the Var department, southeastern France. And it happened during surveys done specifically because they were about to build a new section of the A8 motorway.
Literally unearthed by roadworks.
Exactly. And remember the species name, Escoda. That's directly honoring Escoda, the motorway company.
That makes sense now. What specific bones were part of this initial discovery? The holotype.
It was a really nice associated find. They got the brain case, still connected to the right postorbital bone, a lect squamosal bone from the cheek region, one tooth, a tail vertebra from near the hips, the right tibia, and the right fibula.
A good chunk of the animal.
Yeah, really valuable. They're all cataloged together at the museum, MHNAPV 2011.12, followed by specific numbers for each bone. They also found other bits nearby, more tail bones, more teeth that likely belonged to Arcovenator, just from different individuals.
And there was mention of another jawbone find, the Abelisaurid.
Right, that was an isolated maxilla, an upper jawbone. Given it was found relatively close by, both geographically and in terms of geological age, and considering the phylogenetic results, it's pretty likely it belonged to Arcovenator or something extremely similar.
Makes sense.
And also, quite a few isolated Abelisaurid teeth found in slightly younger rocks over in Spain at a place called Laño have been tentatively assigned to Arcovenator sb, meaning belonging to the genus Arcovenator, even if they can't be certain it's the exact same species, suggests the genus might have been more widespread.
So Arcovenator was prowling this ancient landmass called the Ibero-Armorican Island. What was that place like?
It was a pretty big island, actually, covering parts of modern-day France, Spain, and Portugal. The specific area, the Aix-en-Provence Basin, was a low-lying inland basin back then.
Yeah.
Maybe around 35 degrees north latitude. It had limestone highlands around it.
And the climate, what would it have felt like?
The evidence points to a warm, kind of subhumid climate, but with distinct seasons, likely a wet season and a dry season.
Okay.
Rivers flowed down from the highlands into a big lake in the basin, leaving behind different kinds of sediments. The Arcovenator fossils themselves were found in sandstone laid down by a river, probably near its mouth or on its floodplain during floods.
Right. And it wasn't alone, was it? Who else lived in this late Cretaceous French neighborhood?
No, it was part of a whole ecosystem. The same rock layers have yielded fossils of primitive sharks called hybodonts, different kinds of turtles like foxamies and solemies, crocodile relatives like Musterzabalsuchus and Ischirochampsa, giant flying pterosaurs called asdarchids,
Wow.
huge long-necked sauropods, the titanosaurs, were around, also the plant-eating ornithopod Rhabdodendron, and armored nodosaurid dinosaurs. A busy place.
Definitely a diverse fauna.
And the fact that we find quite a few fragments of medium-sized abelisaurs in this region, even if they're not all complete skeletons, suggests that predators like Arcovenator were probably, reasonably common parts of that ecosystem.
A lost world indeed, pieced together from these finds. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. What are the main takeaways about Arcovenator escadae?
I think we've seen it was a unique animal, especially its skull structure. Those intermediate features, the specific ornamentation, really set it apart.
Right. And its position as a Majungasaurian tells a bigger story.
Exactly. It highlights these surprising connections between Europe, Madagascar, and India late in the Cretaceous, forcing us to think beyond simple continental drift. It really shakes up the paleobiogeography picture for that time in the European archipelago.
And of course, the discovery story itself is just fantastic. An ancient predator revealed by modern engineering. It connects the deep past to our world today in such a tangible way.
It really does, and it kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Thinking about how interconnected these ancient landmasses might have been, maybe in ways we don't fully grasp yet, how dispersal, maybe even across water, shaped where life ended up, and how a single find dug up by chance during road construction can open up these huge questions about evolution in the Earth's history. Maybe this look at Arcovenator gets you thinking about those grand narratives hidden in the rocks.